Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a wonderful afternoon in Yola, Nigeria, and I'm very pleased to join the AGR Africa 2021 Panel 8, which is one of the series of panels by GRV. And this panel will be looking essentially around climate change, agriculture, food, and nutrition. Most importantly, looking around the greening programming, as well as scaling investment in these climate smart policies and programs. And I have with me a great team of panelists. And awesomely, it's the first ever all-female panel, which is going to be discussing this very wonderful subject. But first, I want to introduce myself more. I'm Tabi Joda. I'm the coordinator of Green Aid, and I lead the Billion Trees for Africa project, which has been the pioneer, one of the pioneer agencies that has driven the all momentum around Africa and the world now in nature-based solution, planting trees, growing trees, and restoring landscapes as a critical nature solution for climate adaptation, mitigation, and resilience. And it gives me a lot of pleasure to be on this panel with very great minds. Ladies, I say all ladies panel, which is really, truly amazing. And Cecile, Arnold, I have Charlotte Norman, I have Isabel Zoe, and then Ngozi Amo. They're all very wonderful people with deep profiles and experiences around this subject, and we'll be listening to them speak. But first, from Cecile to the left, I would like you to give a 1-minute introductions of yourself before we move into the heart of this conversation. Thank you, Cecile.
Thank you so much, Tabi. So I hope you hear me well. My name is Cecile Loriou. I'm working for the World Bank as a disaster risk manager and a disaster risk management specialist, and especially in West Africa. We, at the World Bank, we're trying to have more transversal project at the moment. So I'm also part of the team of the Food System Resilience Program, which we are preparing right now. And we're working throughout all West Africa towards a better food security through a combination of disaster risk management, agriculture, but also environment and a number of other initiatives. So it's a pleasure for me to be with you today and with this panel, and I'll be happy to talk a bit more about those various initiatives.
Thank you very much, Cecile. That's really awesome. I now move to Charlotte Norman. If Charlotte is having some technical challenges, can hear her, please move to Isabel Zhu.
I was saying that my name is Isabella Zutem. I work for the National Observatory, and I've been working for the observatory since its creation in 2015. Before the National Observatory, I was working with the Climate Monitoring Unit in the Ministry of Environment before the observatory was created. So I've been working just around environmental issues. Here I'm in charge of climate data management. The data we use for our predictions, climate predictions or forecasts, something like that. And I think that's a brief introduction of myself.
Thank you very much, Isabella Zhu. We can go back to Charlotte if she's there. Charlotte.
Yeah, my name is Charlotte Norman. I work with the National Disaster Management Organization in Ghana. I'm responsible for climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. NADMO, as we are called, the National Disaster Management Organization, seeks to enhance the capacity of society to prevent and manage disasters and to improve the livelihoods of the poor and the vulnerable in society. And so that's what we stand for, and that's what our mandate asks us to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. It's really wonderful. We can see the increasing essence of DRR, in our mitigation and adaptation activities. I will now move to our last panel, Ngozi Amu on the line. Ngozi.
Yes, it's a real pleasure to be with all of you today. Thank you so much for the opportunity to engage the UN Office for West Africa and the Sahel, UNOWAS. I'm based in Dakar, Senegal, where I'm responsible for research and analysis. We cover the 15 countries of ECOWAS, plus 2 additional countries, so 17 countries, and we're looking mainly at regional cross-cutting, cross-border issues. And for the last 2 years, I've been leading research on the impact of climate change on human security. We have a Security Council mandate to do this, and this has entailed what we call risk assessments in 5 countries with close partnerships with the UN system, government agencies, with ECOWAS, civil society. And we're trying to make a link between what we are finding, what communities themselves are saying about how climate change is impacting them, and try to feed this information into regional policy development, because the regional organization ECOWAS is currently developing a regional climate change plan. Again, our focus is on conflict prevention. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. I think generally all what from your introductions are all bearing very strongly onto the subject of today, which is very essential and topical at this moment. We can underestimate the influence or the drivers from climate on agriculture, food, and nutrition. They all have a strong influence on these life holding or these life supporting elements of our lives. Without food, no one can live. And not just food, but there's the need for healthy, safe, and nutritious food for every community. And that should be a factor must supported by the kind of agriculture, like the lady said earlier, food systems. What kind of resilient food systems do we have? So the whole idea of the conversations around climate smart policy and community-based adaptation, as this session will be looking around, it has to bear very strongly on the everyday factors and those that are certainly affecting our communities in their daily lives. Like Ngozi lastly said, of course, the community's understanding, the community's feelings, the community's look at what is actually happening to them is very important. And we should also understand that the climate smart policies should not just be on paper, how these policies have to trickle down into the communities to bear on the lives of the people, in rather reducing this. All of you come from different agencies that have different concerted effort at different levels, continental, regional, and national levels, all aimed at driving the much needed climate adaptation and resilience efforts. So I would like to throw the first line of questions for each of you, and you have 3 minutes perhaps to share your perspectives around this. And I would like to start with those from the national governments. Charlotte, you are coming from Ghana, and of course, in your introduction, you do a lot around climate change and disaster risk reduction. I would like to understand how is Ghana tackling the impact of climate change in relation to agriculture, food, and nutrition, especially in terms of policy and the strategic decisions. Please, you have 3 minutes, Charlotte. Okay.
Thank you very much for the question. Yeah, and so I think we should look at the climate change phenomenon and its consequences on development in the context of Ghana. So studies have revealed that over 60% of the population who live in the rural areas of the country largely depend on agriculture for their livelihoods. This source of livelihood is, however, being threatened for the reasons that population increase and climate change issues are putting pressure on food production. Now, the pressure on food production is becoming more pronounced as a result of climate dependence. And so agriculture in Ghana is predominantly rain-fed. And so it is therefore clear that Ghana's food production is highly sensitive to climate resources. For that matter, issues of climate change need adequate attention to prevent retardation in natural ecological systems, human development, and food security. So based on this background, this response is looking at how Ghana has initiated policy and strategic interventions to tackling climate change issues in relation to agriculture and food and nutrition. So Ghana depends on water basins for food, water, and transport, as well as for hydropower. However, climate change and variability, according to data gathered by the Environmental Protection Agency and other institutions in Ghana and abroad, indicate reduced rainfall patterns and quantities of water, which eventually are impacting on competing agricultural and development needs of the population. Again, reduced volumes of water in the basins have also affected irrigation that ensures farming all year round, especially in the northern parts of the country. Additionally, climate change in Ghana has manifested in flood and drought occurrences that have led to poor agricultural yields, an increase in cost of food leading to nutritional imbalances in some parts of the country. The foregoing clearly demands policy interventions that consider the context of climate change interface with development in Ghana in varying ways which the phenomenon affects. So in essence, the agricultural sector is affected by climate change in the following ways. There's reduction in agricultural productivity, crop yields and livestock production, increase in food prices and distribution, shortages in water, long dry spells, especially in the northern parts of Ghana, poor soil fertility, low livestock productivity and high production costs, increase in tensions and conflicts, examples, movement of the Fulani herdsmen and their cattle to farming communities in the southern parts of the country. And this is creating security and tension. So policy interventions and strategic decisions. Now, in view of the capacity limitations of Ghana to climate change, the government of Ghana has undertaken the listed policies and strategic measures for climate change adaptation and mitigation in the country. Climate smart agriculture. So we see that in the introduction of greenhouse farming, etc. And we have livelihood diversification. And so people have like alternative livelihoods. And then we have industrialization drive. So the government has a policy of one district, one factory. So in every district, there's going to be a factory that is going to produce and make use of whatever is grown within that district. And then we have infrastructural development that looks at irrigation. So there's also a policy on one village, one dam. So in every village, there's going to be a dam. There is a dam created. And then we have early warning systems. We have the insurance schemes. So we're talking with the ARC, African Risk Capacity, and we're also doing some work with GIZ on integrated climate risk management. And then we have research and work done on drought-resistant crop varieties. We have the use of indigenous knowledge and gender considerations. And then we have adaptation to farming systems and livelihoods. And we have subsidized fertilizers. and then national tree planting projects, which has been recently instituted. To be honest, there are a host of policies and strategies going on in the country, but of course, I would leave it here and then maybe continue if there's a need for further intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, for highlighting on the very key strategic decisions that the government of Ghana is taking in tackling the impacts of climate change. I'm particularly very struck by the points around the introduction of greenhouse farming, which is very critical, climate smart agriculture techniques and alternative livelihoods, because most often if we don't have alternative livelihoods, there's often a challenge of where people are moved from one challenge into another and the concentric cycle of challenges. So I think that's really wonderful. And of course, including the integrated climate risk management, which is very key to DRR and climate adaptation, not forgetting climate resilient crop system. I think that sounds really good in what Ghana is doing in terms of policy. And however, we look forward to diving deeper and knowing further what you are really doing. And I will move to my sister Isabella from Cameroon, from the National Observatory on Climate Change. Isabella, I know very well recently, about a few days ago, the government of Cameroon, I think, sent out some information, like some early warning information to farmers and pastoralists around Marwa and Garwa, which is around this same area where I am now in Nigeria, alerting on the floods and torrential rains that were going to destroy crops and animal, and perhaps incur some losses. I think that is really a good thing, but I would like to know practically on the field, what is the government of Cameroon through the observatory actually doing, both at policy and community levels to tackle climate change, apart from these projections and the observatory, other observatory work at the national level?
Thank you for giving me the floor and the opportunity to explain to you how the government of Cameroon is tackling climate change impacts. After the conventions, I think the government has been doing its best to actually handle the issue of climate change, especially at national level. When the National Observatory was created to further enhance this fight against climate change by the president of Cameroon. And so the National Observatory has as mission to monitor and evaluate the socioeconomic and environmental impacts of climate change and to propose preventive mitigation and or adaptation measures to address these negative effects of climate change and the risks associated to the changes. So being a very young institution and budging with lots of ambitions is limited by its technical know-how, but we have been doing much in the field. So the government already putting ONAC is a policy achievement to fight climate change and make it real. Then the National Observatory on its part has to do the field work, the groundwork to carry out activities that will help the local communities, especially when it comes to food security. So every year, the National Observatory produces the agricultural calendar for the year. And then they do monthly, seasonal, and 10 days climate alerts. So this information is shared to all stakeholders to alert them on what may become of them if the climate issue is not taken into account. In Cameroon, the rural population is fully agricultural population. So they are mostly involved in agricultural production for their livelihood. And then it is rain-fed. Even when they do irrigation, it is rain-fed. They have very limited mechanisms to handle this issue of climatic parameters. And also in the, one of the policy was to develop the REDD+ strategy, that is the mitigation process for climate change. And during this study, it was discovered that agriculture was the primary driver for deforestation in Cameroon. So it became necessary to promote smart agriculture. And in this slide, the National Observatory has been collaborating with the Ministry of Agriculture to produce this information, and then the ministry on its part, as technical person for agriculture, helps the farmers to implement and receive this information. And then also another policy is their working mechanism, how the National Observatory collaborates with civil societies as well, so that they can take down the information. It is true that it is one of our challenge where the National Observatory does predictions on climatic issues, give these alerts out on time, but the dissemination is a little bit slow. They can distribute to the administration, maybe in this, in the central administration, and now this various administrations are supposed to take it down, and that usually takes time. So dissemination has been one of our greatest challenges in the process. But notwithstanding, we have been receiving good feedbacks from stakeholders, and at both administrative level and at local level. Yeah, for example, even in the other side of disasters, there was a landslide that took place in the West region, and it was predicted by the National Observatory. And it was only later that the governor had to handle this issue and started being interested in our activities. And so all these administrators are now very interested in the work we are doing, the different predictions.
Thank you. Thank you, Isabella. We'll come back to you. That sounds really interesting what the National Observatory is doing, especially in providing the climate information or climate services information, which is very critical for farmers to guide decisions around cropping and seasonal decision-making. But I'm going to ask you another question, but I'll move to the next panelist, then we'll come back to that. So you can highlight very much on how is it the NOCC is playing a role in ensuring food security, because it's one thing providing climate information, it's another thing ensuring that the risk or the impact actually have a correlation to decision or early action. So with this, I will move to my next panelist, Ngozi. Please, the UN OAS has a Security Council mandate to examine the adverse implications of climate change in West Africa, especially the Sahel, and support the UN system and government to address these challenges. What does this mean concretely? How can it work at the regional level to benefit local communities, most especially those affected by climate risk and different hazards on the ground? Ngozi.
Thank you very much, Tabi, and also thank you to Isabel and Charlotte, because they spoke about the national responses. And obviously in our office, we are looking at regional dynamics and regional responses, but they go hand in hand with government responses. And just before I start, I want to say that the concept that we use in the UN Office for West Africa and the Sahel is often the concept of human security, which is really aligned around survival, livelihood, and dignity. And so it encapsulates food insecurity, water insecurity. And our focus is again on West Africa and the Sahel. And then the second thing is that the Security Council has referred to climate change as a risk multiplier. So we are really looking at how communities that are already exposed to climate change and are extremely vulnerable to climate change, and often are communities that already are afflicted by poverty, by limited access to social services. In many places, communities in places that are affected by conflict, where there's very little state presence. And so we see that climate change adds another layer of stress to these communities. And so it adds on to the risks that people are confronting. And in many ways, we're looking at how, for example, communities who used to have a lot of social cohesion, that there's greater competition for limited natural resources. We've also, some other panelists were talking about farmer-herder conflicts, which is really also related to this competition over water and land. And so to bring this into what it means concretely for the work that we are doing is that there is this understanding often that communities are the first responders to these climate change risks. And obviously the states have a responsibility, and there are these plans and strategies in place, as Isabel and Charlotte alluded to. But because climate change has no borders, it's really a regional or a global phenomena. And I think Cécile will know this very well, because the World Bank, for example, is looking at the impact of climate change on migration. The people and communities actually will have to relocate because they are based in places that will be unlivable because of the harsh ecologic situations. So a regional approach really means it's not enough to just look at what's happening in one country. We have to understand how climate change impacts the dynamics of the whole region. And so UNOWAS, in a response, are working with ECOWAS, which is the regional economic community, and also with other regional bodies to look at what regional plans are needed and how regional plans can be linked to national implementation, and then also how national implementation then is informed by the realities on the ground. And so this is, again, trying to connect the dots. And then in the end, how does this regional policy and approach, how can it be supported at the international level by the Security Council, which is the council that has the global responsibility for climate change impact on human security? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ngozi, for your very brief explanation around this. And it's very good to understand the dimension that the UN is taking, or your agency is taking in this, because if you look at the critical impact on the Sahel, it's really obvious that it's not just about the physical degradation, but there's a whole holistic livelihood degradation. And I think you well observed around the important factors that are necessary, especially the decisions that have been taken in resolving this, which is very important. And I would like to move to Cécile to bring to us, because Cécile, you observed very well that, like Ngozi earlier said, the Sahel is now like an epicenter of so many, there's a convergence of different kinds of climate and social impacts, like the grazer pastoralist conflicts that are emanating from degradation of the landscape, absence of pasture, and absence of very vital ecosystems and the biodiversity hotspots that usually kept livelihood very strong in this region. And I think the World Bank is also doing a lot in terms of driving DRR policy strategies around this region. But I really want to, Cecile, you to look comprehensively at the issue of food security in this region, and what is the World Bank doing? What approach is the World Bank putting in addressing these comprehensive challenges around food insecurity, especially in West Africa? Cecile, 3 minutes, please.
Yes, thank you, Tadi. I was very interested to hear about the various approaches of our colleague, and it's really the way I see it is, and the way the World Bank is seeing it. This is why we're trying more and more to work at the regional level. If we want to make good investments in terms of food security, we really have to have a transversal approach first, and a multi-layer, both in terms of timescale and in terms of geographical scope. Of course, as you know, World Bank is making investments in countries, but we realized that to tackle food security, there was really a need to work with regional institutions, of course, ECOWAS, but we're also working with the CORAF and the SEALs, strengthen those institutions, but also having an approach within the countries. So I told you about the food system resilience program that we are conducting. The first thing that appeared obvious to us was that there was a need for a longer time frame. So it's a program that is going to run for at least 10 years. So the investments will be longer term. And there was also a need to bring together several angles of the problem of food security. So I talked about being regional and also working with countries so we can reinforce capacities of the countries in terms of climate forecastings and climate smart agriculture, etc. But also having the regional entities having a broader views of the problem. But what I was about to say is that the approach we're taking is if we want to strengthen both the preparedness, the adaptability, and the long-term effects and the long-term adaptation to climate change, we need to work first in terms of information that are given to the farmers. So we're working with the SEALs on reinforcing national hydro and met services, and make sure that we're also working on e-extension. So the information that is generated is provided to the farmers and have a sort of two ways discussion and dialogue. So both farmers can be informed, they also can be trained, and they also can provide information which is crucial for the monitoring, notably in terms of pests and diseases. So there's this dialogue that we think is tremendously important. We're working also with agriculture, of course, first to develop center of excellence and knowledge and innovation in that field, but also, and one important point is integrated landscape management, because as we all said, there's no way we can address food insecurity and make agriculture more resilient if we don't work hand in hand with restoring landscape. And so that's really our approach. And the third pillar of this approach is developing markets and trade. And this is really the three angles that we want to develop, and also work with the private sector, but maybe I'll develop later because I went over my 3 minutes. So thank you, Tadi. Okay, thank you very much, Cecile. That's really lucid, and it covers a wide margin of some aspect that we were trying to talk about, the kind of synergies. I think you've done really well in highlighting the importance of those kinds of synergies with the different multi-stakeholder and their engagement. And of course, it links very critically to what Ngozi said, and also what the previous speakers talked about, the connections, the interconnectedness in terms of building the synergies. And I will go back to the national level with Isabella in Cameroon. Please, Isabella, we have all seen the dimensions that these risks are actually not just the physical risk, but the social and
even different dimensional risk on women, especially the women. I want you to perhaps, Isabella, highlight a little on what role is NOCC playing in ensuring food security. Just very briefly, please, you have 1 minute. And of course, at the same time, what kind of collaboration are you building, your agency building with different stakeholders in ensuring this kind of food security, that it is resilient and it is sustainable and it is inclusive?
Yeah, in Cameroon, you know, is agriculture, royal agriculture is mostly handled by women, and they are the kind of cooking house for the family. And this impact, when it comes, it is really heavy on them, because they are the most vulnerable, and they have also very, very limited capacity. Now, the National Observatory has contacted or has lobbied some stakeholders, and is still looking for stakeholders who can assist the situation. For example, we have the Canadian NGO called Kuzu that is helping us in the communication aspect. The information we produce, they have tried to bring together media stakeholders so that this information to reach these local communities in time. And then the National Observatory as program is supposed to have field bureaus, but as of now, being a young institution, these bureaus are not yet in place. I think that can only happen with time.
Thank you very much, Isabella. I think I really admire what your agency is doing, but we need to perhaps maybe in some other time dig deeper in that, because the climate services information cannot be overemphasized. It's very important. Where decision on farming and seasonal decisions are not well streamlined, especially reaching to the end-mile communities, it's even a risk in itself. So I would like to call Charlotte, perhaps Charlotte, to look at how are you actually driving these policies and ensuring that the agriculture that you are practicing, or the agricultural policies, are ensuring sustainability at the same time. With what kind of stakeholders and synergies are you guys leveraging to ensure this food security and nutritional balance system in Ghana?
Thank you very much. So like I said, all the policies and strategies that have been introduced are geared towards a sustainable economy, i.e. agriculture being a huge part of it. That's food security and looking at nutrition as well. So if you take, for instance, the stakeholders that we work with, I mean, at the moment, we're working with Ministry of Food and Agriculture, and we're working with the Ministry of Health as well. We're also doing some work with the academia, and because of course they have a lot of research going on, and so it would be useful for us to be able to put those research results into practice. And so at the moment, we are working with various stakeholders, even WFP, World Food Program, and UNDP, on various levels. I mean, in terms of getting this all taking shape so that we do not fall short in terms of food security. And so, like I said, the policies are there, the strategies are in place, and hopefully, if we are able to work together, even with the ECOWAS community, because sometimes, I mean, issues like flood and drought, they are not country specific. I mean, they overflow into each other's countries. And so ECOWAS, we are also working with ECOWAS on certain regional issues, and because of our time, there's a lot to it here. If there are any further pertinent questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Oman. I will move very straight to Ngozi. Back to Ngozi. I am very thrilled by the highlights that you've made so much around the issue of synergies and the long-term impacts of some of these strategies, as was highlighted by Cecile. I want to come to your own point of view from the UN OWAS. What partnerships do you think are really needed to maximize the impact, both in the short and in the long term, to address this climate risk?
Thank you very much, Tabi. And I think in a way, what all of us have presented so far is the testimony to the fact that we really need everyone to work with everyone. But I want to make the distinction that obviously we're talking about climate change, and the interesting part of this is that you can't even say that climate change affects one country in a certain way, because it's really pockets of places. So in the northern part of the country, climate change affects communities different from how communities in the south and the east and so on. And so I think it's important when you think about partnerships too, to think about it in a context of where you are trying to make an impact. And so, for example, in the Sahel region, which is a very vulnerable region, and often many communities are vulnerable to conflict or are in conflict zones. I think the partnerships you need there, obviously, you need to work with, we work very closely with our humanitarian colleagues in the UN system, with governments, with civil society. But I also think, as Cecile was mentioning earlier, with the private sector, I think if you're working in other contexts, you need to bring in the private sector, and you need to have an open mindset, I think, because climate change affects every society, every sector of society. And the response to climate change also has to be a multi-sectoral response. And so it's important, I think, at the early stages, when thinking through how to address this, to really widen, the scope of partnerships. And the last thing I want to say is that in the UN, we have this idea of a triple nexus: security, development, and humanitarian. And I think never before has it been this important to really have this integrated approach. So whether or not you're working from a standpoint of food security, or you're working from a standpoint of government policy, or as you know us, from a conflict prevention perspective, you need to come together and form those partnerships for a holistic approach. Thanks.
Thank you, Ngozi. Thank you, Ngozi. I move very quickly to Cecile. Cecile, you've heard Ngozi highlighting very importantly these partnerships, these synergies, and their relevance, and how we can't deny their importance in terms of driving the expected resilience effort that we need, along these margins where climate is actually most affecting affecting people. And we understand that the World Bank is very keen about agricultural value chains for food systems, which is very important. I want to put two very straight questions to you, Cecile. What do you think is the role or the importance of the private sector in enhancing these agricultural value chains? And if that is important, how do we bring together the different sectors, the hydromet, and other sectors, civil society, the women, and community-based organizations so quickly into these connect to drive a wider and more accelerated action on the ground, Cecile?
Yeah, I wish this could be done quickly. But yeah, as fast as possible, and there's a need to accelerate those process. You were asking about the private sector, so definitely yes, we're trying to push really this connection between public sector, private sector, and academic sector. Actually, we're really trying to have this triangle forces, because one can deny that the public sector is under very strong pressures on resources, public resources, and it's very difficult when you have competing areas like education, health, and then you have to decide how much you're going to give to the hydromet services, and very often forecasting services, and especially in hydrology, they are left with very shrinking budgets in that sense. So we truly believe that the private sector can, first of all, because they're very mindful of the importance of those subjects, and even for their business, it's very interesting to also address the question of resilience. And they usually have a bit more leveraging power, and they can support and work in partnership with the public sector. So very concretely, we are exploring first in terms of national hydro and met services, a possible link with the private sector. The easiest way of looking at it is, of course, for dissemination. You probably know that we are promoting working with phone companies to have a better outreach of met information, agro and hydromet information. So that's a very obvious, but a very efficient way of working with the private sector. And we use that also in disaster risk management in some countries, where we really have those partnerships where we make sure, in terms of disaster, climate disaster, that the phone companies are going to be the driving force to disseminate the information. We also want to work a bit more with insurances and make sure that, and notably crop insurances, like to provide them with the right indexes, so that they can tailor products that are adapted to the farmers. We want to work a little bit more in promoting value chains. So I told you about promoting markets and regional trades. So our role would be to work on regulation. So we create a better environment for the private sector to thrive and help this regional trade, which is absolutely crucial in terms of food security. If you really want to tackle food security, you need to make sure that you don't have cross-border constraints to the circulation of food and goods. So yes, that's a few examples of the way we work in the private sector. And you mentioned rightly how communities also are very important, and how important it is to empower them and make sure that they work hand in hand. And I mean that we partner and with those communities. So I'm not going to go too much into details, but yes, certainly in our projects we want to go. We say we want to have a end-to-end approach. So we also build capacity of those community in terms of resilience and ability to look for the right information that they need. So they, as you said, that they are the first responder. They have the capacity to respond before they get help from the state or the public sector.
Thank you, Cecile. Thank you very much. I just want to say I work as the ambassador for the Great Green Wall, which is running the biggest nature-based solution across the Sahel, the Sahara. And also I'm the DRR champion for UNDRR and African Union Office on DRR. And I have this question that comes to me each time, since I work on local communities, this question that often comes, that private sector seem to be a solution, but at the same time, they drive a lot of degradation in terms of like the mining that exposes the landscapes to toxic chemicals, and even exposing the critical ecosystem resources like spring and stream water, which communities depend largely on for their natural water drinking. They often get contaminated, polluted by these. So I think there is a whole sensitivity around these where we are trying to solve a problem, but at the same time, maybe either creating or highlighting or underlying another or driving another challenge. So I wanted you to perhaps tell me what kind of private sector will you advocate or will you recommend should be, that should be involved in this kind of driving this kind of strategies that we're talking about in such a way? Is it the private sector that works for the few, or is it the private sector that actually promote and protects the interests of this critical mass of vulnerable communities? How will you want the private sector to operate?
The question is for me?
Yes, Cecile, yes.
Okay. Well, when you say private sector, this is so huge. There's no way you can have a uniformity in the way you approach it. Of course, you have big companies with no morality, and the only way to manage this problem is regulations. So we are also working with governments and regional entities so that they can work on regulations that control that type of behavior that at this stage of humanity, I would say, are strictly not acceptable anymore. And we have to work all together. So we make agriculture and private sector working together to restore the ecosystem and work with, using landscape management tools. So this is one side of the private sector. But when we talk about private sector, we also are talking about farmers. Like they make money out of this business, the small business, and we also have small farmers, and they are also private sector in a way. So it's very difficult to describe it as one thing. I guess the way we want to approach it is that we know there are synergies between small companies, small local companies, and farmers that can be done, and this is what we want to promote. But again, to answer your questions in terms of degradation of the environment, only regulation can help, and not only regulations, but creating in regulation, but enforcing them. And this is a totally different area, but we're also working on that.
Okay, thank you very much, Cecile. I think that sounds really good. Ethical practices are very key to driving resilience at every level, and that should go with tough regulations at every level. And then I think if I will ask each one of you, perhaps to just share your one last key statement that you think is very essential, the key takeaway from this meeting. What will that be for you? I think, let me just continue with you, Cecile. 1 minute, please, because we are actually at the end of the session. What is that takeaway that you want to leave for a minute, please?
Yeah, I'll probably use a tweet.
Key message that.
I really enjoyed what Ngozi has explained towards the importance of having an eye on also human security. And I think in the Sahel, it's particularly important, and we have to take this into account. So if there's one thing I want to remember is that we need to work at the community level first and go all the way through to state and regional level. It is extremely important that we don't forget along the way that it is communities that are first responder, but also the most vulnerable. But also they are the ones that can make the change. So we can rely on them if we empower them, if we give them the resources and the knowledge, and we link them with all the other actors, the other stakeholders along the way. I'm absolutely sure there's a possibility to make a change, and your initiatives, planting trees, for example, is also something that are often driven by communities, or at least you have a momentum within communities. So we have to rely on that to make the change. So that would be.
Thank you, Cecile. I love that connect. Communities, not just the end users, but also participants and stakeholders, key stakeholders in the entire decisions and planning. I love that. And Now I go to you, Ngozi, from your point at the UN OAS, what is that last key message that you would like to leave?
Thank you very much, Tabi. No, I think this has been so interesting, especially for someone like me who works in a political office. And I think what really comes to me right away is the need to be very humble in approaching climate change, because I think it's an uncharted territory in a way. We don't have all the data. We don't have all the information. We don't have all the answers. I see that there's so much going on, and it's been really empowering to hear from Charlotte, Isabel, and Cecile about the different initiatives. And I think we've said, all of us, the need to connect this. But this humility is important. I think one area we haven't touched on is that there is an awful lot of local knowledge and local talent, traditional practices that needs to be combined with new technology, with innovation. And that also women, and I think Isabel and Charlotte talked about that too, make up sort of 80% of the agriculture force. And so to support women in innovative solutions to address climate change so that human security can be fully promoted. Thank you.
Thank you, Ngozi. Thank you so much. Charlotte, are you there? Please, can you just 1 minute or if 40 seconds, if possible, please.
Yeah, I'll try.
What is that one key message that you want to leave behind that can drive more momentum, more action? What should we do differently, and how do we get there? No, I mean, in just one sentence.
Yeah, okay, you've taken half of the time. But I would like to say that the effects or impacts of climate change should be looked at both regional and national levels. So there is the need to learn from best practices, compare notes, share data where possible, so that we can move forward as a region and as a continent as well. And then as a world, we can move forward in combating the effects of climate change, especially on agriculture, food and nutrition. Thank you.
Yes, I go to Isabella. Isabella, what is that one last thing that you think of agencies like yours doing climate observation or climate information services, working with Hydromet and others? What should they do, or what should we do differently now, perhaps in driving towards the expected goals that we all are talking about?
I think the first thing is this synergy. This issue of synergy is going to help us produce better results, because maybe we have to create this synergy will help us create a kind of basket where everything is thrown inside, because the National Observatory, for example, needs a lot of data. So, and this data comes from different sources, and this will produce good results. And secondly, also the specificity of Cameroon with the 5 different agroecological zones makes it very specific at the regional level. And Cameroon can also serve as a kind of site where you have the similar things happening in other countries, have part of Cameroon as an example, because the different agroecological zones are based on the different climatic conditions, and they have this influences directly the agricultural system in Cameroon. So we are waiting for a better synergy to help us achieve our objectives.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Isabella. And I am very pleased with all your discussion. And thank you very much for all the ideas, the perspectives shared, very diverse, in-depth perspectives around this subject. And we see now the power of the woman, not just in speaking, but in experience, and how deep it can go in driving the change we albeit need in catalyzing effort, action, and around climate change, agriculture, food and nutrition. Never a time has food systems resilience been so important. And this is also part of the foundation on which our lives lies. So I would really like to thank you all and thank the team that has made this meeting very possible and effective. GRV team, Ayan, Noor, thank you all very much for giving us this opportunity to share our perspectives. I hope we make a change from where we are sitting right now. And thank you very much. I look forward to interacting more with you and perhaps in implementing the conversations that we have talked about, especially the synergies. This is the time the action is most needed. Never a time has our communities been this important, and we need to really go back in driving and translating all the messages we have shared here in true action to drive the action, the impact that is down there. Thank you very much. Have a very wonderful evening to you all, or wonderful afternoon, wherever you may be. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tavi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tabi.
Thank you.